we certainly don't want to forget the families of those that were involved in that shooting there in Texas yesterday. So let's certainly remember these families. We've got several requests from last week. Let's continue to remember the Pamela Brock family. Sister Maggie, her brother Donnie Cup was sent home for hospice care. Jim Wallace, Jeff and Missy's son Ryland. I don't have any update on Lynn and Tammy's, or Lynn's stepdad, Paul Baird, let's remember them. Warren Burge, Jim's sister-in-law. He just told me that I got a praise report today that they've taken her off of the ventilator. So that's good news. We give God the glory for that. So remember Brother Jim Bennett, Sister Melinda's sister's family, Dolores' son, Anthony's nephew, Brian's niece, still doing okay, or about the same? Okay. Continue to remember Debbie and Mike. And that's all I've got. Anybody else have anything else you would like to add? Sister Becky. Okay. All right. Anyone else? All right. I guess what we can do, we all come to the altar this evening. Let's take it to the Lord in prayer tonight. Those that will. All right, Brother Bobby.
You know, there's some days gravity seems just a whole lot heavier than it does on other days. Just getting up off your knees is a struggle sometimes. Okay, we are going to be back in Genesis chapter 19. I'm going to pick up in verse 4. But before we do, there's an introductory verse that I read last week. I'd like to read it again in Luke chapter number 17. Yes, Genesis 19 is we're going to do our verse-by-verse study, but I'm going to do an introductory reading out of Luke 17. And begin Luke 17, verse number 26 is where that's the introductory verse. They were wondering about, what to look for when Jesus returned. So in Luke 17, verse 26, if you notice, there's going to be the days of Noah and the days of Lot. They happen simultaneously, but it's separate events going on, but similar. Some are the same, but there's something that's unique that sets them apart. In verse 26, so as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. Now I want you to listen to the words in verse number 27. They did eat. They just didn't worry about anything. They just going to eat. Just sort of like we are today, ain't it? I mean, people are going to go to a restaurant. They're going to fix up their... It's all about people going to eat. Don't matter what's going on in the world, they're going to eat. Then it says they drank. Now, to bring you up to speed, you remember when you couldn't go to church, but you could go get drunk. So does that remind you that maybe it was as it was in the days of Noah and Lot? They don't want you to worship, but the bars are wide open. Then they said they married wives. Remember that word, they married wives. They were given in marriage just like nothing at all's happening. The world's going to go on forever. Today they got through yesterday, they got through today, tomorrow may be even better. But they lived their life. They were planning for the future, the next generation and the next generation and so on. Until that day, the day that Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Now he likens this in verse 28 as it was in the days of Lot. He gave you what was going on in the days of Noah. Now in the days of Lot, they did eat. Same thing they did in the days of Lot, right? And they drank. You see, that's nothing changed. But then something did change. They all ate in the days of Noah. They drank in the days of Noah. In the days of Lot, they ate. In the days of Lot, they drank. But notice here, they bought. Isn't it it's strange that it doesn't matter if it's through QVC or Amazon or the mall, and people are going to buy. They just love to buy. They sold. They're about making money for a living. You got to have money to live. They planted. You didn't see that in the days of Noah, so they're planting. So evidently something is happening in the days of Lot, is that now they decided they need to plant. And they builded. They're looking for a future. What did not show up in the days of Lot that was in the days of Noah? What's not mentioned? But, well, not the flood. It's what their daily life was. It's what were the people doing? Okay, but what were they doing in Noah that they don't show up doing in Lot? Okay, let's just try it this way. Look at verse 27. They married wives. In the days of Lot, you don't see them marrying wives. What is the days of Lot? It's all same sex. It's boy with boy. That was the chief sin. That was the immoral sin. In the days of Lot, what do you see now? Not as many. Do you remember when people went crazy, had to get married by Elvis in Las Vegas? Drive-through marriages. Even Gatlinburg's got drive-through marriages. Used to, people wanted a church wedding, getting married in the church. Now it's let's do something nobody else has done. Let's jump out of an airplane, swap vows on the way down. This last couple set themselves on fire and tried to get it till they got to the altar. Put them out. I don't know if they ever exchanged vows or not. But they want the unusual. The traditional church weddings are on their way out, and that's for the people that even bother to get married. So you understand, while they were doing all these things in the days of Noah, in the days of Lot, marrying wives isn't even mentioned. It's a different time. Look at your TV commercials and see who it is trying to sell a car or a hamburger or insurance. But I'm going to back up to verse number 4 and pick it up. That way we're going to verse number 5. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. I know we covered this last week. But right about bedtime is when the foolishness and the shenanigans and the wicked stuff began to happen. Seems like the wicked really love the nighttime. Honest people are in the bed. Wicked people are looking for something to get into. The men of the city, which were the Sodomites, compassed means that they surrounded them. Old and the young means they were teaching every generation the same immoral sexual sin. Do you not see wickedness? Two of the last 7 mass shootings were done by 18-year-olds. So wickedness is getting younger and younger and younger. And so what the teaching of verse 4 is that the immoral sin that was happening in Sodom was passed down to younger and younger and younger generations. you will find that even at the middle school, they're committing sins in the middle school that we didn't even do in high school when I was going. It's getting younger. They're on drugs younger. They're stealing younger. They're breaking in younger. They're rebelling against authority younger, because generations before them taught them how to do that. The older teaching the younger. Every quarter. It doesn't matter. You cannot, the defense that they used was, well, he wasn't raised right. He wasn't loved enough. He didn't get enough hugs. And so therefore, he turned out like he did. It's not his fault. That defense is just thrown out the window. It's the rich. It's the poor. It's the fact that they have a wicked heart. It's got nothing to do with your upbringing. Got nothing to do with how much money you do or don't have. It's got to the fact that people have turned wicked and fallen the devil instead of following God. Now let's go to verse 5. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men that came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. So they called to Lot. They knew his name. They knew right where he lived. He was very familiar with them. And they knew by his name, by his house, and what they wanted when they got there. Now, heaven is inside his house. 2 angels, representatives from heaven, from God there. And what I'm getting to you right now is the fact that when it comes to this same sex, it comes to sodomites, and it comes to that immoral sin and the days of Lot and what was going on in chapter 19, these people are brutish. Now, is every same sex the same way? Absolutely not. You got people who follow that life, if you will. Good people. They work jobs, raise kids, live right next door, don't cause anybody any problems. They're the people that raise their kids, are on your kids' basketball team. And they live alongside everybody else. Does that make it right? No, it's still an immoral sin. But it's how they live their life in front of others that don't believe the way they do. And then you got the sodomites that we're talking about in Genesis 19. They're brutish. Totally different. Same sin, but totally different. They go to the house and demand the men be brought out to them that they may do what it is they're going to do. We all know what that is. They're bold enough to go to the house. Are they bold enough to go to God's house to seek what they're after? Yes, they are. Let me prove it to you. There's a church about 10 minutes from here. I was once a member many, many years ago, 31 years ago. You had a boy, grew up in the church, trusted him, married, was raising children. And he had this secret. He'd been taking little underage girls from the school, taking them out to the church, sexually abusing them at the church. One little girl told on him. Nobody believed him. Nobody believed her. Church stood behind this old boy. He ain't that way. We've known him his whole life. Come to find out, she's telling the truth. But then his lust and his boldness grew. And it grew to the place that he took a gun. He set his sights upon a married woman in the same church. When her husband was gone to work, he took a gun, kidnapped her, raped her, abused her, murdered her, threw her body away like it was trash, thought he got away with it. That was in church. So I'm asking you, are they bold enough that they'll make themselves in wolves in sheep's clothing, be counted amongst the church just so they can have an advantage to try to get a hold of our little girls and possibly our little boys? Will they come into the church, even though this is a place of God and God's people, just so they can have access? Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to be a pastor that's going to hide this very thing. If you're ever going to protect this church, you got to deal with it. You can't pretend it don't exist and hide it under the rug. We're not going to do that. We're going to protect these kids. Are they bold enough to come in and be part of our youth group and be part of our church family just to have access to our little girls and boys? Yes, they are bold enough. Another church, you used to attend that church. Pedophiles came into it while I was going there, seeking after some of the little girls in our youth group. Found out who they were, what that was all about, sent them packing. Are they bold enough to come to any church and be a part of any youth group? I'll guarantee you they're sitting on the same bleachers when you go to watch your kids play some kind of sport. Are you also aware of the fact that there is 54 registered sex offenders in the city of La Follette alone? Not counting the county. This is just in the city of La Follette, just minutes from where we are right now. But you also know there's 102 kids been taken out of their homes in Campbell County because of sexual abuse and put into foster care. So I'm asking you, do you believe it's real, and could it possibly happen to you or me? Could it happen? Could somebody set their sights, some pedophile or some Brutus sodomite or whatever, set their sights on some of our kids and grandkids, even though they're in God's house in a youth group or a part of a church or a Sunday school? You better know it. They're not scared of God, you or me or nobody else. Their lust drives them, and so does their boldness. And so I've just proven to you 2 churches right here within just a few minutes' drive that it actually did happen, and it got to the point where it was kidnapping and murder. Do you suppose we're living in the days of Lot? Here they are at a man's house with angels from heaven in his house, demanding that he send these 2 men out to him. Don't you ever think they're too scared or frightened to come around where we are just to get at our kids. They'll do it. We better wake up. Be vigilant. Because the third thing they did, they demanded. Do you understand that there's no such thing as consensual? It ain't like they went along with it, even though they're not of age. They went along with it because they were okay with it. They demanded that this happen. They didn't care if they were participants or not. They were trying to force their will and their way and their sin and their lust on somebody that didn't want to participate. So is it possible that they would actually take one of our young boys or girls and take them out and forcibly rape them? Yes. Why do you find so many kids missing? Then they find them murdered and their bodies thrown in a ditch. Because some pedophile found a way to get close to them, to get them away from where they are and trust them enough that they could get them away from any adult. And did exactly what these men are wanting to do to these angels. They demanded that the angels be turned over to them. What do you think that school systems in America are doing with our own kids right now? First, second, and third grade, they're trying to teach them sex education. Not here, but they're doing it around the country. They're trying to convince them that they need to choose where they need, and are giving them hormone shots. 5, 6, and 7, and 8 years old. And you don't think we're living in the days of Lot? You better start paying attention. Because I'm telling you, we're in the days of Lot, when they sneak our kids right out from under the authority of the parents and put their own wicked agenda on children. That's the day we're living in right now. So you can't tell me, looking at the verses, that we ain't living in the days of Lot, because we are. Turn them over to me. That's just what this world is trying to do, is say, even President Biden said when those kids are under the authority and in school, they belong to the teachers, not the parents. There'll never be a time where my kids or grandkids don't belong to us. They go to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, not all this other foolish business they're trying to put on them. So I say you better know what's going on with your children. Move on ahead. Fourth thing, they tried to force their sin on these angels. They didn't know they were angels. They just thought they were good-looking men. And they tried to force it. So I'm saying what the agenda in the days of Lot isn't that what this immoral sin is consensual. It's the fact is they're trying to have their way. Because most of your profilers will tell you it's not about the act of sex. It's about the act that they control you. And that's what these men are trying to do, is to control the situation and their sin. Let me go on ahead before you think I've crossed the line. The men did not care, nor did they even recognize these were heavenly angels. Let me ask you this. Do you think that these brutish sodomites, do you think they care that we're Christians? Do you think that they care the little boys and little girls they're trying to go after in this form right here? Do you think they care that they're Christians? Absolutely not. The world doesn't care about God. They don't care about the church. I'm telling you, we're living in the days of Lot. Sixth thing, they expected Lot, who was supposed to be a godly man. They expected him to accept and participate and support their sin. Is that not what federal government is trying to do to the church? Not only do you let them in, you have to let them be as members, and you have to let them serve. That's what they're saying. And if you preach against it like I'm doing right now, it's a hate speech. And you and I have no rights. But this community, they've got all kinds of rights. They can march, they can say what they want to, they can hold their little posters up, they can protest at a church, in front of a church, in a church, and it's all legal, free speech. But preaching the Bible ain't free speech, but everything else is. So, I'm going to ask you a bunch of times tonight, are we living in the days of Lot? Because they are trying to force the godly to accept and participate in the ungodly. You remember, I said it last week, do you remember about the two different times the bakeries were forced to close because they refused to bake a cake for same-sex wedding? They lost everything they ever worked for. The courts ruled in their those that sued on their favor. Well, say, you don't have much rights left. Now, we might be okay here in this county, but I promise you there's some different states and big cities you wouldn't. They expected the godly to hand over to the ungodly, to turn them into ungodly. Y'all know that Mick Jagger, fellas with them Rolling Stones? You know, he wrote a song, says Sympathy for the Devil. Made a statement back early in his career that he would live long enough to see the demise of Christianity. Now, he's probably 80-something years old, and we're still going okay. I think Christianity is going to outlive him. But do you understand they don't care about what we believe, what this Bible says. They don't care about what we believe is right and what we believe is wrong according to this book. They expect us to allow our children and our grandchildren to be turned over to their agenda. And the biggest instrument they're using is public school. Because they get that for nothing. It's paid for by tax dollars. To get the church to accommodate them, they have to go to court. And that takes money. But we're living in a time where they're even ranting and raving about abortion. They're wearing, that one woman had a T-shirt on that said, "Fetuses make good snacks." Yes. And you had another one at a protest with a little baby doll like a child plays with a knife stabbing the little plastic baby doll, saying, "This is an abortion." So you understand how wicked the heart has become in America. They think sodomites would not have stopped at just this one time. They would have kept coming back after those men until they killed them or were tired of them. If you think the wicked get bold enough to just sin one time and they get it out of their system, you better think again. They just makes them bolder for the next time. Ninth thing, the ungodly did not respect God's people. You remember years ago when people were out in sin, whether it be this one or any other one, they liked to keep it hid. They kind of stayed in the closet and didn't want anybody to know it. They still did what they did, but they did it secretly. Now they're out there waving flags and getting on TV and writing books and doing news conferences. I thought what somebody mentioned last week might have been Brian. You know, drag queen comes to the second grade and reads his books for a day. And parents were just fine with it. Anything that a child sees in elementary school and in high school and in middle school is an influence to them. We send our kids to public school to learn writing, reading, and arithmetic and how to get along with others. And it seems like they ain't getting none of that. 10th thing, it wasn't consensual, it was forced. Even a judge will tell you, even in the bonds of holy matrimony, a husband does not have the right to force himself on his wife. And so with that being said, it cannot possibly be legal for this type of sexual sin to be forced on an unwilling participant. But does it matter? It absolutely does not. Do y'all remember years ago a fellow named John Wayne Gacy? They know he killed 33 boys and young men. Went by Pogo the Clown. He performed all types of magic tricks and clown stuff and circus stuff for children's hospitals, birthday parties, and he was accepted in the neighborhood. And kid had a birthday, they'd call the Pogo the Clown to come out and do tricks and entertain the kids. Only they didn't know they were opening up their kids to a pedophile and serial killer. He would get little boys and young men, he would abuse them, rape them, torture them, kill them, and bury them under his house. All the while, nobody knew, and they were letting this man in their backyards have access to their kids. So, can I just say it one more time? Keep eye on your kids. Don't trust everybody that puts a clown face on. Know who the people are that's going to be in your home and where your kids are going. Because you never know who that person really is. He's a friendly man. And the neighbors liked him. Verse number 6. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and he shut the door after him. Now, was that the smartest thing to do? Was it smart for him to go out there and face that crowd alone when he knew what they were after? And he went out to them and he shut the door. So that left him alone with a whole group of men wanting to do what they were wanting to do. Second thing, he was alone with the wicked and with the bold. Is that a good place for a Christian to be in? I preached a message a few years back, don't never be alone with sin. You can get yourself in a world of trouble as a godly human being when you're alone with somebody wicked. Because if anything's ever said or done and it becomes public, well, guess what? They're going to take the word of the wicked over of the righteous every time. That's the world we live in. So whatever could have been done or said while Lot was out there and didn't have any witnesses, he was by himself, it would have been his word against them, so he would have lost if that's all it went. So don't never be a wicked. How many Husbands, wives, and preachers have lost their families and their ministry because they made the mistake of being alone with somebody they had no business being alone with. And it could have started out that was never their intention. But then again, anytime you allow yourself to be placed in a circumstance where it could go the other way that quick, and even if nothing happened, all they have to do in our day and time is tell that it did. Is it smart for a pastor to never be alone with a woman they're not married to? Kind of keeps that out of the book then, don't it? The wicked are always trying to separate us from God, and they're trying to stop the church. I got one of these headline news flashes on my phone. It Googles, and there's one of the things, and you put your finger on it, and it tells you what the headlines are. You kind of know what I'm talking about, even though I can't explain it. Two things, and I'll get to them a little bit later on as well. Number one, they've been investigating the Southern Baptist Convention for over 20 years. It's sexual sins that's been going on inside the church that they allowed to be covered up. So when people start blaming that only happens under Catholic, you better think again. It happens where any time that there's opportunity for lust to take precedence over godly decisions. There's a pastor in Indiana, please, Indiana the state, not Indiana Avenue, Indiana the state, other side of Kentucky. He had sexual sins, this pastor did. They found it out going back 20 years, and one said 27 years, and the woman testified he'd been taking her in his office and having his way with her since she was 16 years old, and just kept it up and just got caught. When it came out, do you know what the church did? They surrounded him and prayed for him. If it happened here, I already know what route you are going to take. You'd get these big old boys sitting back there in the back right now, and you'd lead me out of here and may even kick me in the back part on the way out to make sure I got the message. And that's right. You hush, Scott. Brian, remember that talk me and you had? Yeah. All right then, you just be ready. No, it ain't got a thing to do with his tie. Yeah, but what I'm telling you is that's right. You can forgive, you can pray, but there is such thing as disqualifying yourself from the ministry. If you can't control your urges no more than that, you ain't got no business being in the pulpit. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It happened repeatedly for over 20 years. So do you understand, it's not just same-sex sin, it's sin as it was, because the reason I say that, Lot is about to offer his 2 virgin daughters. He also has daughters that are married, and he has sons-in-laws. So it wasn't totally 100% same-sex in that time. There was also male and female still marrying. But it was a minimum. So what I'm telling you is this Indiana pastor, he commits adultery, has been going on for over 20 years. Started with a girl that was 16 years old by a man that she trusted, but too scared to say anything till it grew up and it got public. Then she came forward. So you can't be too careful. Everybody needs to be accountable. I need to be accountable to this church. Not just here in this pulpit, not just inside, but my life outside this church. Because if I'm out there living wickedly, committing open sin, and I'm like the prodigal son, I'm just having a big old time, I ain't got no business being in this pulpit ever. And so I need to be accountable. I need to be accountable for my preaching. I need to be accountable for my daily life. I need to be accountable how I treat my wife. If I'm wicked to her, I ain't got no business being your preacher. So let me move on ahead. That didn't get many amens. Look at verse number 7. This is not going to be one of these shouting things. I just want you to know the reality of where we're at. And also I want you to be extra careful, this entire church, that we that we shepherd every kid that ever comes into this church, that we all take a responsibility to watch out for them and keep them safe. And said in verse 7, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Number one, let me say this to everybody in this church. The righteous should never be begging the wicked for nothing. Do you understand? We don't bow before the wicked, ever. We don't bow before the devil. We don't ask him, can we have a good service, please? Can we worship God? Can we do this? The wicked got nothing over us. God give us dominion. He's talking about his children, dominion over this entire world. That ain't just the domesticated farm animals. That's talking about this every square inch of this planet. He gave to his children. So number one, he begins begging. Don't you ever get to the place where you beg the wicked for anything. Number two, the wicked have no compassion for us if you did beg. You think you're going to win them over with kind words? Absolutely not. They're looking for weakness. Third thing, this right here ought to make you cringe. Lot called them brethren. Is brother and sister not a term to use between actual brothers and sisters and saved church people? And a lot of people use it, number one, because if you're in my generation, that's how you were brought up. Second reason we use brother and sister in the church is some of the time y'all can't remember the name of the person you're talking to anyway. Am I telling the truth? You ain't seen somebody for a while, but you know you can get away with brother or sister. With guys, at least we get brother and buddy. Hey, bud. And then I think we pretty much wore out dude, ain't we? It ain't used that much. But number one, they ain't got compassion. They're not our brethren. They're living wickedly. They're of the devil. And so Lot goes out and he tries to play the I've been here a long time, I'm one of you, I've been a part of you, I'm one of the sodomites in there, and he tries to play that card, and by saying, come on, brethren, we can work this out. You can't do it because you're offering two different playbooks. The wicked only want to use the godly to get what they want. You ever heard me say that the husband wouldn't ever go to church till he gets in the doghouse and his wife's about to pack her bags and leave him? Now all of a sudden now he's a godly man. He's there every time the doors are open till she takes him back. Then it's right back to what he once was. We've all seen it, have we not? Might even grew up with it. The wicked are the same way. How do you think? I wish I'd have wrote this down. But there are these mega churches, these world churches that have campuses all around the world, are firing pastors. One just got fired in Chattanooga 2 weeks ago. All for the same thing. Sexual sins. Messing with people in the church. They get caught. And they're fired. So what I'm trying to get to you, if it's that rampant in the church, should we not actually watch even closer than we've ever watched? If it's happening with pastors and Sunday school teachers and deacons and men who are supposed to be setting example in the church, if they're the ones committing these sexual sins, what chance does the church have? And let me ask you, every time one is caught, you know what happens? It gets on the news. It gets on the 6 o'clock news. They flaunt that stuff as if every preacher's that way. Every church is like this. And they lump us all in the same thing. And we're not talking about non-denominational churches. We're not talking about charismatic churches. We ain't talking about these churches that just start up and they just got a whole new thing going on. We're talking about established Baptist churches who are hiding sexual sins inside the church. And sometime or another, after a while, everybody gets found out. The Bible says, be sure your sins will find you out. But every time something like happens, you got lost people saying, listen, that church ain't no better than the world. They don't live any better. They don't do any better. They steal. How many pastors, secretaries, and treasurers have been caught over the past 10 years stealing from the church? Now, we ain't got that here. Lord, I trust everybody right here. I'd almost let you do my banking if you wanted to. I mean, what I'm saying is, I don't even know how to do my banking. But I'm saying I trust you enough that I would trust you to do it if it was that. I would. So we trust everybody here. But we never get to the place where we're completely laxed, is that we're not constantly vigilant. Because every time something happens in the church, it matters not the denomination or the sin. They spread it everywhere, and the lost herald it from one end to the other. Why should I go to church and trust Jesus? Because they ain't no different than out here. And when you ever get to the place, and I've seen this to be a true statement, and it ain't a pleasant one to tell you, but I have heard people say, and I know that it's true, I have been treated better at my local bar than I was at your church. Yeah. And it's a true statement. Is that every church? No. But does it happen? It absolutely does. Everybody's best friends at a bar till they get too much liquor. But if you want to pass, and this church is not guilty, if you want to pass somebody needs some money, you can tell somebody at a bar full of drunks, they'll pass a hat and fill the hat up. And you got some churches, not this one, that won't give. And everybody's friendly at a bar, like I say, until you say something wrong. Worst fight that broke out back in the 70s, do you know what it was about in a bar? They was trying to name all 7 little dwarfs. And they had to call every county cop they had. True. But have you ever been to a church? When I was in evangelism, some churches are real friendly and some churches will treat you like they don't care if you're there or not. You know what I'm saying? You can go in, sit down, and nobody come back, shake hands, glad you're here. Here's my name. That's what I was talking about when they're treated better at a bar than they are at a church. When I was doing evangelism, I have sat down in churches and sat there and not one person shake hands with me. Even had one preacher kind of knew who I was and knew that I was in Bible college at that time, and so help me, he preached 20 minutes on preachers going to school. And he wasn't for it either. So you understand, people in some churches can be cruel. And people at some bars, you're either going to be accepted or you're going to get the snot beat out of you. They ain't holding middle ground. But God's house is the one place where they need to see the love of God, but it's also the same place where God's people need to be attentive to what's going on and who's coming in and who's not. Do you believe and agree with me that this church is open for whosoever will? But do you also agree that there be people who can come into this church that we know ain't here for the right reason? I'm not saying it's happened, but I'm saying it could happen. That's what I'm saying. You welcome everybody, but you keep an eye on people. The prodigal. Well, according to that prodigal, did he not have a godly daddy? Was he not raised right? Until he got of age, demanded his money, went to a far country. Now we know that the lust in his heart, the temptations that he heard, the things that his body and his mind said he wanted to be a part of. And he had all kinds of friends down in a faraway land till he ran out of money. The next thing you know, none of his friends that enticed him to go down and introduced him to whatever sin he committed, not a one of them gave him clothes, not a one of them gave him a bite to eat, not one of them gave him bus fare home. They left him in a hog pen, turned their back. As long as he was doing with them, he was one of them. That's what the wicked do. They use you until they get everything they can get from you, then they leave you. Number 6, pointing out sin won't stop sinners from sinning. You can point somebody's sin out all day long. You can itemize, you can line it, you can line item it, everything they're doing. Is that going to, pointing out their sin to them, is that going to get them to stop? It takes God to stop them. They have to have a desire to stop. I went into church one time and I wasn't even thinking about being saved. I was a teenager. And I was working for this old boy, and his wife went to church, and it was Pentecostal. And I didn't have the proper church clothes, but what I had on was clean. But what they didn't like was the fact I went in with an earring and hair down to my elbows. They couldn't handle that. Not back in the 70s. No, sirree, Bob, you did not do that. And this old boy, he thought it was his duty to find out that place in Corinthians that it's a shame for a man to have long hair. And he had to point that out and read it to me. And the second thing he had to do was get his wife away from me. She was on the pew ahead of me. I was sitting with a family that I worked for, wasn't bothering nobody. But I was the devil's child, and he couldn't have her that close to me. Did I ever go back? No, I did not. Did anybody show me the love of God? Not one time. Did they care if I was on my way to heaven or hell? Not a person in that church. Even the preacher didn't come back and shake hands with me. So I'm saying it ain't about appearance. They can change appearance. It's what's going on inside of their head is that you got to wonder about. So I'm asking you this, and this is a question we need to internalize. What sin is it that we ignore? Let me ask you a question. Don't raise your hand. Don't you even acknowledge nothing. But everybody either has a friend, a neighbor, or a family member that is in some type of sin that they're committing that you don't want anybody to know about. You don't agree with it, but your hands are pretty much tied on how much you can say about it. Does it make it right? Does that mean you accept it? No. But we've all got somebody that we know that's close, that's in some type of sin every day. Let's go to verse number 8. Y'all want me to just quit this and we can just start? Y'all want to study something different? As soon as I get done, we will. Let's go with verse number 8 and see if we can get part of the way through it. Behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do you to them as good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing. For therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. The last line in that, the reason Lot made an offer like he did, and I don't agree with it, is the fact the custom was in Abraham's time, if somebody came under your roof, they were your sole responsibility. You had to protect them at all costs. No harm could come to them under your roof. You had to make sure you fed them the best food you had in your house available to you. You had to provide them a place to sleep. You had to provide them water to wash their feet and water to wash their hair and water to wash their hands. They were under your care until they left your roof. Now that's the reason Lot did what he did, because he knew, according to his custom, he was responsible and he could not let those men out into there because they had become his responsibility. So he says this, I have 2 daughters. Not just 2 daughters, but 2 daughters which had never known men means they were virgins. Well, if you consider the fact that the majority of Sodom was homosexual, it ain't that big a deal. They had no desire for those girls. But I ask you this, what loving father, no matter what the custom was and no matter what the situation was, what daddy in this church could hand their daughters over to those men knowing what they were going to do to them? They would have had to climb over my dead body to get at my girls. I don't care about the custom. And you see, Lot had lived in Sodom amongst that lifestyle and the wickedness going on, that was his first offer. I'll give you my 2 girls. Do with them as anything, I don't even care. Knowing that they would abuse them till they killed them that night. That wouldn't even been on the table. But here's what I want to get. Do you agree that going back 30 years in the church, that fathers have allowed things to come into their homes and allowed their little girls and boys to do things today that they never would have 30 years ago, because we're living in an environment that allows more without condemnation. And so you begin to get accustomed to your environment. Now, if he would have been on the well-watered plains, if he would have been with Abraham, there's no way Lot would have ever offered his daughters to these men. I've got people I've known personally and are kin to that now have situations where they're allowing their daughters to live with men and as husband and wife in their own house unmarried. Would have never done that until it got to be their girls. Then all of a sudden I can let it happen. Is it still the same sin it was? Is it still wrong? So I go back to my other question from the other verse. Is there something that a Christian who was solid on this book is now allowing it to happen knowingly, but you're allowing it to happen because it's your family or your close friend? Do you hear what I'm saying? Now, you ain't going to answer that, but you understand when it comes home to us and it's close to us, now all of a sudden it's a little different. We've railed against it if it was somebody else. But it takes strongness. It takes a strong backbone to stand when it's your own family against what you stood for when it's somebody else's. I'm just preaching the book. I ain't accusing nobody. I'm just saying this is it. What loving father would do this sin? It would only be one who had been down in Sodom to the point that he had allowed his boundary and his border to become so blurred and so far out that he was willing to cross everything now that he didn't cross before. He said, you just do what's good in your eyes to them. Do you ask a wicked pedophile, just take my kid and do what you want to? Is that not what he's telling them it's okay to do? Is it right? Well, standing on this side of it, we can see how wrong it is, can we not? But he's on the other side. He's desperate. Right now, there is just no boundary he won't cross to keep them from getting these 2 men. Even giving his own children up. But what chance do your kids have if you allow them to live with the wicked as the wicked? Ain't that why we set rules and boundaries for our kids? You can't. Has any parent in here ever had to set their foot down to your children growing up and say, these people ain't good for you to be around? Well, that's just part of what a parent does, keeping your kids away from the wicked influence and godly, because kids have this driving power to do everything that they want to do and what you don't want them to do. And it's tough because here's what you're going to hear. But they go to church and they let their kids do it. Now they go to church, but they let their kids wear these dresses. But they go to church and they let their kids wear their hair like that. They go to church, which is why, it puts a parent who's trying to raise their kids close to God and close to this Bible, puts us in an awkward position where you're constantly fighting against, but they let their kids against that. And sometimes kids can get you to the place they just wear you down and you just throw your hands up. I'm tired of fighting with you. They're persistent. He allowed his family to be exposed to open sin until it became normal. Let me ask you, I know I bring this up a lot. I'm just asking questions. You can do your own internal investigation. Do you allow your kids to watch and rent movies that you know ain't right? Do you allow them to listen to music you know ain't a bit godly and it's kind of wicked, but they just love that singer? Would you bring Marilyn Manson home to your kid? Y'all know who he is? Why God ain't sent a lightning bolt down on top of his head, I'll never know. Openly, blatant against Christianity and God. But yet, parents let their kids go to his concerts. If you think about it, would you allow your kids to be exposed to every wicked thing? Do you remember years ago when we were kids, parents wouldn't even let their kids go to a dance at school? Even before that, they weren't allowed to go to a movie theater. Weren't even allowed to go swimming with boys and girls in the same lake. Where are we at now? They got stuff that can be piped into their computer and iPads and cable TV in their room it's like, you can't understand it. They've got access to it. They protected strangers. He protected the strangers and handed his children over to sinners. Here's what I want you to understand about the day we're living in. You whip your kid, you lock them up, tie them to the bed or whatever you got to do just to keep them from running out and sneaking out and getting gone, you'll be the one in trouble. You try to keep them out of wickedness and having wicked influence over them, you'll be the one that gets sued. I don't understand the system. All we want is our kids to grow up godly and grow up right and not be exposed or hurt or harmed. But in the days of Lot, do you not agree with me? It's getting even harder and harder and harder to do that very thing. You believe they can learn stuff in public school other than reading, writing, and arithmetic? Do you not think that there's kids that's been way out there in the world where our kids ain't even thought about going and now they're learning from those people? Well, isn't it true that in the day that we live in, that the victim is no longer under the protection of the law and the judicial system, but the criminal is? They can harm your kid. You do something about it, you're the one going to jail. Got 1 minute. I'll have to visit this again. Lot was more concerned what others thought about him. Let me tell you something. When it comes to your kids, it don't matter what somebody else thinks about you. What matters is you doing whatever's necessary to keep your kids safe. If people like it, they do. If they don't, forget about it. Lot felt responsible to the strangers, but not his family. Don't matter what they think, does it, church? What matters is that you protected your children. Now, I'm going to close. With everything that I taught here this night, do you believe without doubt that we are right now currently living in the days of Lot? All the immorality and the sexual sins that were mentioned, that were brought up, is that not going on around us? Is there not a very conscious effort to take the raising of our children away from us and put it in the hands of others? Good, then I've taught you the truth tonight. You agree that we're going to work together as a church family in unity, one mind, one accord to keep every kid in this church safe? All right.